Our next speaker is Robert Hansen, R-Snake. Many of you have read his blogs and have learned quite a bit about security like I have from this gentleman. So let's give him a warm welcome, and thanks for leaving the confines of Texas to come to the beach.
My pleasure. Test, test. Is that okay? Can you, ooh. Is that all right? Can you hear me? Excellent. So yeah, my name is Robert Hansen. I'm a director of product management at White Hat Security. It's really great to see all of you. There's so many familiar faces from years ago. A lot of new faces too. It's really, it's pretty amazing. When I started in this space, there was just a handful of people in the world doing it. And now, I mean, this room easily dwarfs anything that we had in the entire world, just this room. So it's pretty amazing. I used to run hackers.org. For those who don't know me, I've written a couple of books. This presentation really isn't about me or my company. But I wanted to, as a keynote, I get a sort of an interesting take on the world. I get to do something a little different than I normally would do. Typically, I do some super technical talk. One I did at HughesecCon, for instance, was taking down China, for instance. So I'm not going to do that, not super technical. Instead, I'm going to be talking about something a little different. How I can help the community in general is by looking at problems that I think we all have, things that I see that we could all improve in just a little bit. And so what I'm going to be talking a little bit about is the difference between privacy and security. And I think that sounds like, oh wow, I know everything there is to know about that. But I think we all, in fact myself included, tend to make mistakes when we talk about the differences between those two. And I wanted to sort of articulate that. So we all know this guy, Edward Snowden. It made a lot of press over the last year or so. But I want to read you something that I wrote just and kind of get the general take on it. So Edward Snowden's revelations have made everything harder for law enforcement to perform legitimate criminal investigations. Now Tor, Bitcoins, Janus VM, PGP, full disk encryption is the bad guy starter kit as opposed to being known only by the most elite in the industry. So therefore, security has been degraded. Right, so I think if I say that in front of a crowd of people, it actually sounds like I'm making a pretty accurate statement. There's nothing really like opinionated about that. There's nothing like really contentious even about those statements. It seems mostly factual. So let's try this statement. But said another way, governments can no longer spy on innocent people who have now know to take their privacy more seriously using things like Tor, Bitcoins, Janus VM, PGP, full disk encryption, thanks to Edward Snowden. Privacy has increased. So looking at those two statements side by side, both of them are probably perfectly factually correct, independently. Put together, they're actually more accurate without the sort of the spin that you get if you only hear one of the two, right? Does that make sense? So that, I think, sort of levels the playing field. Now, there is a difference between those things, and I think depending on who you are and what you're saying, they can actually have very dramatic changes in how people perceive what's going on. So what is security? I found myself asking this stupid question. Like, I've been in this industry forever. Like, I don't actually know the definition. I should probably go look it up, right? So here is dictionary.com's definition. So freedom from danger, risk, safety. I think we can all agree with that definition. That fits what we talk about. Freedom from care, anxiety, or doubt, well-founded confidence. That's not us, right? We're not doing that. Something that secures or makes safe, protection, defense. Definitely. That's definitely something we work on, defense. We talk about it all the time. Freedom from financial cares. Now, this is actually probably one of the more interesting ones that I think a lot of people fail to recognize as being probably one of the most important aspects of security. Freedom from financial cares or want. The insurance policy gave the family security. This is actually probably the most important line item on this entire deck. It's really important that you know that monetary, maybe not in the currency sense, but some sort of protection of assets is very important to security. And then precautions taken to guard against crime, attack, espionage, sure, that also fits the definition that we typically talk about. What about privacy? So the state of being private, retirement or seclusion, sure. We want to have our privacy taken care of. The state of being free from intrusion or disturbance in one's private life or affairs. Phrased another way, the security of one's secrets, right? So security and privacy do dovetail really nicely in that particular set of definitions. Secrecy, A private place, no, not that one, right? So there are some interesting tidbits, just even the definitions. When we really like break it down and articulate what the differences are, there are very interesting little gotchas, even in the definition. So this is a sort of a technical example of where I think this problem comes up. I like to pick on STS. It's my favorite, like, kind of non-technology thing to pick on. It's still a technology. But for those who aren't aware of it, strict transport security basically makes it so that you always go to HTTPS. Once you go there again, right? So said that way, it sounds like I'm saying it's good for security, right? Does that make sense? So if I say STS does this, you're like, oh, that sounds like something I want. I don't want to be downgraded by SSL strip or middler. That sounds good, right? But said a different way, it can actually be used as a tracking pixel. 1 bit of entropy for every STS domain that I set. There's ways around that. You can clear your cache and whatever, and browsers have implemented that. But so it's bad for privacy a little bit, right? It's also not great because in some certain circumstances, if you set STS, a domain meant to send you to HTTP, they can redirect you up to HTTPS, and then subsequently refers, which contain private information and also nonces, can be sent to a domain that you didn't intend it to. So that's bad for privacy and security. So now when I say it that way, it's a little harder to talk about what is it? Is it good for privacy? Is it bad for privacy? Is it good for security? Is it bad for security? Because those things aren't necessarily, they don't even go hand in hand, even in a single technical example. Not that you can say that one is bad or one is good, it's just that they aren't exactly the same. You can't say the net effect is good or the net effect is bad without doing this sort of analysis. Yes, Jim? Two different ways. One, it can be used as 1 bit of entropy for every subdomain you set it on. So I can have 30 iframes on a page, set it or don't set it. That's each one of those things is a bit of entropy. You need about 30 subdomains to get a tracking pixel for every single man, woman, and child on the internet. That's one way. The other way is when you have 2 domains, one is HTTPS, one is HTTP, no referring URL set, you redirect up to HTTPS, set STS, and subsequent, what, Jim? Yes. No. All right. Jim's with us. All right. So what this really is kind of moving interestingly towards is that we're turning out that STS is kind of a technical example, but in general, we're sort of seeing things like this, exist.com, which are technologies that basically monetize your privacy. They figure out ways to track things that you're doing and give you some small feature set that may or may not be attractive to you personally. But what they're really doing is changing your privacy into a commodity. And there's lots of examples of it. There's technology, for instance, that's on your mobile phone that as you go in and out of certain geographic regions, it'll target things to you. And they say it's totally anonymous. But the thing is, and it probably is in that context, aside from the fact there's cameras in your credit card and your RFIDs in your sneakers. But barring all that other sort of correlation stuff, you can actually track to two different locations. So they have to have gone through one location and then a subsequent location before you target them. If you do it to a very small geographic location, like someone's house, you can actually target this exact person. So technologies like that, I'm not saying they're bad, but they do have privacy implications, and they basically are monetizing people's privacy. So this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm sure you've seen some variant of this. There's lots of different examples of this. But I think there's several interesting things about this that, that we don't really talk about as an industry particularly much. So the first thing I immediately see is that privacy really isn't anywhere on here. Yet there's many examples of people killing themselves when their privacy is stolen. And so what's really going on is if you look at any particular example, like sexual intimacy is a very common example where someone doesn't want someone to know that they cheated on them or that they're a drag queen in their spare time or whatever, right? Whatever it is. Those kinds of things can drive people to do sort of crazy things and kill themselves if their privacy is outed. Please don't kill yourself, by the way. Come talk to me first. But it turns out privacy is and security both are actually directly integrated into many of these things. So safety actually has its own line item. It's sort of like built here. The security of your body or employment. Employment should be rephrased. It should not say employment. It should say money. or currency or whatever it is that you rely on. Because you could have daddy's money, and if you run out of daddy's money, you might kill yourself, or you might be more susceptible to die of exposure because you can't pay for a house, right? So it's not really employment, it's the stuff you need to survive, and that can be all kinds of things, commodities, food stamps, whatever, right? Some sort of currency. Let's say there's an example where you had a really wild night out in Vegas or something, right? And you come back to work and you're like, man, I don't know what I did. I just completely blew it. I lost everything I had, right? And you do some searches on Google. You're like, okay, how long do I need? How long do I have before I have to eat again, right? You know, because like I don't want to spend any money until I get paid, right? That's kind of what you're thinking. Well, your boss can monitor that traffic and say, hey, this guy's in financial peril. I probably shouldn't, trust this guy with the keys to the kingdom, right? Or that kind of thing. So that kind of makes sense, right? What if you do the exact same thing out of your house, though? You do it out of your house, and you're thinking, I'm not doing this at work. I'm searching for, how to, consolidate debts or, make money quick online or, all kinds of crazy things or whatever. But I'm doing it in the privacy of my home on a completely separate computer, not work-related. Does my boss have a right to have that information? Probably not, right? I think we could all sort of agree that that's sort of not really his business, what goes on in the privacy of your house, despite the fact that there is financial implications for him. But then you go to the office and you log into the same Gmail account and your search queries are logged because you turned that option on. And now does your boss have a right to that information? Right? So there becomes this weird thing where you can actually have these sort of downstream effects where you get fired and then you have increased exposure to the elements and you're more likely to die, all based off of some little stupid widget on a page. I mean, obviously there's a long steps to get there, but you get what I'm saying. One more quick point about this. So their Maslow's hierarchy of needs is related to people, but you could create a very similar diagram that's related to companies. Companies have a very similar set of things, but the things that they need are more like intellectual property and money. If they don't get a certain influx of money, people get laid off, and then you have no more company, right? So there's a very similar but different sort of layout for companies. The one common thing, of course, is money. So just so we're level set, I wanted to do a couple exercises. So you have to sort of ask yourself, which of these things which are they related to? Are they more related to security or are they more related to privacy? So why would you close the bathroom stall, right? Well, maybe you don't want to go to jail, but probably if you're in your own house and you close the door and there's nobody home, what are you doing that? You have this weird intimacy thing. You're trying to make sure that you feel private. You feel more private when the door is closed, despite the fact there's no one home, right? Don't do it if there's people around, by the way. Don't leave it open. Why would you close the curtains in your hotel room? I did it this morning, right? I did it even after I was leaving. I mean, it's not like I'm worried about getting arrested. I was clothed, but I still closed it. Why do I do that? For privacy, right? I don't do that for security. I don't want people to see my stuff in there. I don't want them knowing anything about me, right? But there might be some security implications, right? Maybe someone could steal something out of it if they knew I was there or not there or whatever. Patch your Flash or Java install. This is probably, most people would agree, is a security thing, right? But there is some tangential privacy stuff. Maybe they could steal stuff at an order, like down the road. Like once you get compromised, then they could do something anti-privacy. But not the indirect. It's more indirect as opposed to direct. Keep medical details from your boss. Why would you do that? Well, it turns out you'd actually probably do it for both. You probably are worried about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If he fires you because he thinks you have cancer, that directly impacts your ability to survive. I mean, literally, you're going to more likely die of cancer because you don't have health insurance anymore. But it really is a privacy thing. It turns out that kind of information is privacy, but it directly impacts your security as well. So all of these, if you go down, even things like hiding your employer. Hiding your employer is an interesting one. I'll get back to that one in a minute. But why would you ever want to hide who you work for? It sounds ridiculous, right? I mean, we all know each other. That's one of the very first questions you ask. There are reasons for it, though. I'll get back to it in a bit. So a lot of people think that privacy doesn't matter. Like, oh, I don't have anything to hide or whatever. Well, it's not necessarily about you. It's about everybody, right? We're sort of in this game together. And you might have loved ones who you really don't want to see anything bad happen to. Regardless of whether you understand it or not, they might have secrets. Amanda Todd, for instance, she killed herself when she basically had some provocative pictures go out on the internet, and people started, treating her bad and so on. She felt terrible about it, and she killed herself. cyberstalked. This is a woman, I forget where it was, Peru or something, or Italy rather. Italy, where she ended up getting killed by her husband, who found out that she had a fake account, decloaked her basically, found where she was really living, and then killed her. So a privacy-related thing, again, related to a death. Political dissidents, and sorry, it's so small, but it's not really important. But I'm not just talking about Chinese dissidents, which I think are the most common thing we talk about. But there's also like religious dissidents. The whole World War II. People who have different ways of thinking about things from the master race. It turns out that they have something to hide when someone's coming to their door with a gun, right? So there's all kinds of things, like Bosnians, the Russians, and Chechnya. There's all kinds of ethnic cleansing going on. So it depends on what side of the battle line you're on. This is kind of an interesting one. Drug users in Colorado prior to 2014. 2014 was an interesting year because now it's suddenly legal. So before this date, when it became legal, this is a crime you go to jail for. Now it's not, right? So now it doesn't really matter whether you're private or not. But before, it really does. It's the difference between you going to jail and not going to jail, right? So that tiny bit of privacy can actually dramatically increase your security, right? The other interesting thing about that is it's interesting to look at how the government has not really apologized to all the people who put in jail now that they realize they're wrong. They realize they're wrong, they've changed their laws, but they haven't gone back and actually made whole the people who they have done these terrible things to and put in incarceration, right? The government doesn't apologize, by the way. And then you have sexual deviants like Alan Turing, kind of the godfather of cryptography and in fact, modern computing. We wouldn't even be here if it weren't for this guy, probably. He killed himself because he was gay. Someone found out he's gay, and they later basically got rid of him, arrested at some point, and eventually killed himself. He has since been pardoned for his crime of being gay, just I think last year. So this is kind of a easy table sort of way to look at the problem. And this is just a hybrid, just random stuff I threw out. I didn't intentionally pick anything super contentious or whatever, just some examples. And my wife looked at this, she's like, this doesn't prove that everything has one yes and everything has no. I realize that, but this is a good exercise to sort of look at it. So updating your machine for a security update. Is this good for your privacy? Probably not. Indirectly, maybe, but not directly. Corporate privacy, the corporations don't get any extra privacy out of you updating your machine, right? Consumer security, absolutely. Absolutely, this is really important for your security. You got to update your machine, right? Corporate security, maybe. Depends on what we're talking about, depends on what type of patches we're talking about. But if you, again, take the word security and you stop talking about computers and you talk about what they're really interested in, which is the finances of the company, absolutely. Because if your software product is losing you money and people don't trust your product anymore, that is effectively a shot across the bow, right? So absolutely that affects corporate security. In this weird roundabout world of where security of money is the same as security of technology or your person. So what about being anonymous to protect yourself from predators? So is that good for your privacy? Absolutely. Is it good for corporate privacy? No, they're not going to get anything out of you being private, right? But consumer security, absolutely, right? I just gave you a whole bunch of examples where people were nice people, potentially very useful people to our society. They ended up killing themselves over not being anonymous or not having that level of anonymity or privacy or whatever. Corporate security, no, they don't get any money from this. There's nothing to be protected there. What about logging out when you're done? Again, yeah, it's very similar. It's going to have almost the exact same thing across the board. But this actually could be good for corporate security. No cross-site request forgery. You can't break into this site. You'll be able to maintain access to this your own account. I don't have to spin up my CSRs and waste money. Right? Again, protection of my money. Updating user machine to get new features, which increase revenues for the company. There's no value from a privacy perspective for the consumer, none. Corporate privacy, No, they're not going to get any private stuff out of that. They're not going to, maintain intellectual property or whatever. Consumer security, no, they're not going to gain any security. Probably security is going to go down if they added extra features of anything, right? But corporate security, yes, they're going to be able to retain more revenues, build more revenues based off of that feature. In fact, if that feature breaks for some reason or gets compromised, they will be calling you and saying, "Go fix it immediately." It's endangering the company. DRM backdoors. This is one of my favorites. Sony was implicated in this, for instance. Consumer privacy, absolutely not. There's nothing good about this for consumers at all, really. Corporate privacy, absolutely. They're able to maintain their intellectual property, which is the music, the CDs. They're able to maintain that, continue to make revenues off of it. Bad for consumer security in all kinds of ways. Backdoors allow bad guys to log into your machine remotely. There's nothing good about that. And corporate security, yes, because again, they maintain the revenues associated with it. And lastly, maintaining user state even after logout. Terrible from a privacy perspective for you, great for them. Privacy because they're able to detect previously suspended users or people who might be trying to do something multiple times, pulling data off your site erroneously or whatever. Consumer security, probably not. There's probably nothing for user to gain. There might be a little incremental gain, but probably not. And corporate security, absolutely. They can maintain revenues. So let's take a different example, Tor browser. This is actually, if you want to delve into one type of technology, I think Tor browser is actually one of the more interesting ones. So I think people want to think that this is good for privacy and security. They want to because they're looking for a solution to these problems, and I think we all agree that the faster we can get to that solution, the better. Why would it be good for anonymity, or why would it be good for privacy? Let's take an example. So let's say I want to submit a loan application. From an anonymity perspective, I can't be anonymous because I have to tell you who you're going to give the money to, right? I have to tell you, my name's Robert Hansen and I want a loan, right? So anonymity doesn't even make sense in that context. Privacy, yeah, I may not want my boss to know that I'm doing it, right? I don't want my boss to know that I'm maybe not doing so well or that I need a bridge loan or whatever, right? So there's no good way to like anonymize yourself as you're going through Tor because you have to tell the other side what you're doing unless you're using HTTPS. If you're using HTTPS, that's a different story. But over HTTP, not so much. What about if you want to surf legal adult material as opposed to illegal? Anonymity, you probably don't need to be anonymous, probably, unless you're like in the church or a political person or something, and you're gonna lose money or whatever, lose your right in the polls or whatever. Privacy, yes, you don't want your boss to know you're surfing porn at work, right? Not you ever do that, right? Right. So what about being a political dissident? Absolutely, absolutely. You do not want anyone to know. You don't want your friends to know because you're putting them in jeopardy and yourself in jeopardy. You're never going to say your name as you're submitting all these documents to a foreign nation or whatever, or the press or whatever. You're not going to give them your name unless you're stupid. But yeah, that's a perfect example where Tor is a perfect fit. That's a great example. There's no problems there at all. It works perfectly. What if I want to research pressure cookers? So I'm Robert Hansen and I'm researching pressure cookers. No, I'm not going to create any bombs, despite what you might think. But I do want a crock pot. And so that's an example where anonymity, I actually do want anonymity. I don't want anyone to know who I am when I'm doing that search, because they're just going to ask too many questions when I'm just looking for a crock pot, right? Or whatever, right? It's not a crock pot. I don't even know the difference. I'm not allowed to research it. From a privacy perspective, I probably don't care. If my wife finds out that I'm searching for crock pots, she probably will just think I'm making a tasty meal, right? Which is probably more likely. And then lastly, downloading an executable over HTTP. This is probably never a good idea because it'll break your privacy and security when they give you malware, because it turns out the exit nodes can do bad things to you. And I'm not saying this out of school. I mean, Tor says the same thing. When something's over plain text, a bad guy can do something bad to you. The exit nodes are all basically maintained by people who are already sort of security savvy people who may or may not have your best interests at heart. By the way, no judgment calls there. It's just these are some facts that I think most people don't understand. So this slide doesn't really make sense without the bubbles. But so there's multiple different parties involved in, say, a single sort of type of business online. So this is an example of Google, for instance. So Google in this bubble here, which you cannot see because it's way too light, but their interests are in higher ad spend. They basically want to make more money from ads. That's the one thing that they've got unique to them. And they want more data because that helps them in all kinds of different ways downstream. Whereas advertisers typically want high conversions, low cost per click. They want higher click-through ratios, good return on investment. They basically want to make more for their dollar. Every dollar they spend, they want to get 10 back. And the thing that they've got in common, because you can't see these bubbles here, is monetizing users. That's the one thing that they all agree, that those groups agree on. They both are trying to monetize users. Users, on the other hand, their interests are primarily privacy, security, and value. They want high-value products. They don't want to get compromised when they're doing it. They want the best T-shirt for the best value, right? The thing that they have in common with advertisers is quality products. They want a good T-shirt because if the advertiser gives you bad T-shirts, you're not going to shop there again. The thing that users have in common with Google is search quality, which makes sense. When you search T-shirts, you don't want to go to a malware site. You want to get a good T-shirt site, the best value T-shirt site. And the only thing that they all have in common all at the same time is faster performance. They all want the browser to go faster. It's good for Google because they get more ads in front of you. It's good for the advertiser because you're more likely to click through because you're not wasting a lot of time on a bunch of stuff superfluously loading. And it's good for users because they get to surf more of the internet quicker. But where this is, I think the most interesting part is actually why Google and the advertisers are not in alignment. Particularly in the privacy space. So Google, because they want more data, you'd think that that's the same. They're in alignment with the advertiser. The advertiser wants a lot of data too, but the advertiser has no incentive to want Google to have that data. Google, when they have all that data, they can create alternative business models, and they've done this numerous times in the past. And basically hurt the advertiser by creating competitive businesses because they know a ton about that, right? Theoretically, anyway. I'm not saying they actually do that, but that's possible. So there's no alignment of that particular one. And in Google's perspective, this is worth a lot of money. And what I don't mean like pocket change money. I mean many tens of billions of dollars a year just in advertising business alone. So when we're talking about incentives, this is very important to understand the rationale behind why someone would want to do that. So this is a document that was written by effectively some analysis identified as the actual author being the IAB, Interactive Advertising Bureau. But it was a letter written by Congress to Mozilla to basically say that we shouldn't allow third-party cookie blocking because somehow that blocks banner ads, which it doesn't, but let's say. And because it blocks banner ads, it's more likely for things like Amber Alert to not show up because there is some scenarios where they can put Amber Alerts on ads. Not that you would even identify that that's what it is because no one even looks at ads, but they believe this is somehow ... hurting the children, right? So you have to look at why was this letter written? It's not that it was written or that major technical fallacies in its authorship, but it's why it was written. It's very interesting. There's very interesting alignment issues. And why it was written is because the IEB pays Congress. And not that much. We're talking about hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, not a tremendous amount of money, but there's a direct incentive there for them to write these types of letters and get things changed in the browser or stymied in the browser that would allow their business model to do better. In this case, ads. That's what we're talking about. And by the way, Google sits on the IAB board of directors. So in this case, it's pretty simple. I think we were able to identify what the true motives were pretty quickly. And I think we can all agree ads were the reason that letter was written. In this case of search engines I talked about, it's basically higher ad spend, right? It's pretty easy to figure out that kind of stuff. But remember I was saying that whole thing about understanding, trying to hide who you work for? This is actually a really interesting, big problem in our industry. So a couple of weeks back, I got in an online conversation, which ironically started with a lot of ats. You probably aren't going to see this conversation. But it was this guy who was commenting on a post that I made, and you're going to ask, why can't I go look this? Why are you telling me a conversation on Twitter? I'll just go look it up myself. I'll tell you why you can't do that. This guy was basically commenting on something I was saying about the ad industry, and basically I thought you should use AdBlock Plus or something equivalent, not AdBlock Plus, but something like that. And he said, he was kind of changing the conversation about protecting advertising revenue and companies need to stay in business, and this big long diatribe, and just really kind of going back and forth. And I'm like, I just didn't understand, like, why is this guy coming after me so hard? And not just like one or two tweets. We're talking 10, 15 tweets back and forth. So I went to try to figure out who this guy was. There must be some incentive. What is the purpose of this? And he did a very good job of hiding who he was until I found his resume. And his resume told me he worked for the company that I was talking about. And so his incentives were directly aligned with moving away from ad blocking the browser, in the browser. So immediately I said, well, I would expect you to not understand what I'm talking about given the fact that you work for the company I'm talking about. And I'm actually not interested in outing this guy. It's not the point of this. It kind of defeats the whole purpose of this deck, actually. But the important part was, as soon as I said that, the second I said that, he immediately said, this conversation is over, and started deleting his tweets. He went backwards, retroactively, started deleting all his tweets, which is why you can't go look up this conversation, although I did keep a log. The irony here, the irony of this whole thing is the exact thing that I was talking about, the privacy aspects of it, were the thing that was going to hurt him the most. So the exact technologies that are able to decloak people on the internet are the exact technologies that can get him fired for talking about this stuff on his company's behalf without being authorized to do so. The privacy that he wanted by deleting all of those tweets, he wanted to reclaim his privacy, is ironically the thing he's trying to take from all of you. See what I'm saying? So that's a very interesting anecdote, and I have a whole bunch of very similar, but I think that one's, since it's so recent, just a couple weeks ago. The irony is the privacy that you take from people might be the exact thing that they come after you for down the road. If you're hurting somebody down the road, and I hate to put up Hitler's stuff, the Third Reich or whatever, but I think if you extrapolate it from the Third Reich, not that I'm calling EMC RSA the Third Reich or anything, please don't quote me on that. The allegations of them downgrading security for all of us are that people are now coming after them. They're actually going after them. So by virtue of their privacy being broken by Snowden, they are now going to be hurt by that fact. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's important to look at motives and understanding what the ramifications of that are. So I think most of the time you can figure out what people's motives are just by looking at who they're paid by. Not all the time. Sometimes people are just ethical people and they have good motives. Sometimes not, though. So it really comes down to what an expectation of privacy is. So there's companies like NIP, which you probably never even heard of. I hadn't heard about it until I started doing this research, that sell something called the Twitter fire hose. So we have some people who work for Twitter here. You might be aware of this. The Twitter fire hose is basically every single tweet that's ever been made in real time. They're just firing it off. And so there's a bunch of companies like Mass Relevance, Apple, People Browser, Salesforce, or whatever that correlate all this stuff and use it for all kinds of tracking, advertising, sales, marketing, all kinds of stuff, right? So ironically, this poor guy who thinks he just deleted all his tweets now has to go to all of these locations to remove his tweets. So if there was some expectation of privacy, it's long gone, right? It's long gone, and there's no way to get it back. There's no easy way to go back and ask all these people, pretty please, will you go delete my tweets, right? So this guy's job is permanently in jeopardy as a result of this, right? So it really comes down to when are you really off work in this type of environment? When do you get to say, my job doesn't dictate who I am, right? And I get to say whatever I want in my spare time. Well, it turns out, in today's day and age, it's very, very likely that it's never. Which is very scary, and you guys should not be happy with that. I think this is a pretty good example. Randy Zuckerberg, Mark Zuckerberg's sister, there's a couple years back, she had something go out. There was a picture of her family and around Christmas, and somebody found it, friend of a friend kind of thing, found the picture and posted it up, and then Randy Zuckerberg is saying, like, that's totally uncool, that's supposed to be private, right? This is somebody whose brother makes a living off of basically correlating, aggregating, and then marketing to all these people based on their private information, right? It's sort of hypocritical to fight for security and privacy sometimes, and then on the other hand, take it away. Because you can't really do that. You can't win both fights at the same time. You can't be private and then take it away from everybody else. It doesn't work that way. It turns out we're all sort of interrelated. This is a beautiful quote by Upton Sinclair. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding. I think that is what we're coming towards. I think that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing the motives being perverted by corporate money, by people's own salaries. Now, let me take a different stance on that. So I've told you one side of it. Let me tell you the other side. So who could forget Silk Road? What a great year for Silk Road. It was so fantastic. So many different things happened. If you didn't follow it all, it's pretty amazing. By the way, Ross Ulrich actually came from Austin, which I thought was interesting. I didn't know him, but pretty interesting. So two things came out of that. One, it turns out that AppSec is the most critical hole in Tor when Tor is used properly. When Tor is not used properly, there's all kinds of other problems, but when it's used properly, AppSec is how Ross and all of his compatriots got nailed. They told too much information, they gave too much information away, and then ultimately the second problem was it proves that the problem is the buyer. The buyer is the major hole in this because you have to have a physical address to send stuff to, right? The government was able to correlate somebody sending fake IDs to a location. They got Ross, and then they correlated all these other OPSEC problems he had to his original identity as the owner of Silk Road, Dread Pirate Roberts. So there are other problems. The sellers do have problems as well. In fact, there was a great article just a couple weeks back about how the sellers can be correlated at the post office when they're shipping stuff. If you come in shipping a couple pounds of cocaine to the post office, you might get nailed there too. There's other stuff here. This is it's a little light, so I'll read it to you. This is a post that was done on the underground by a group called Cthulhu. It said, solutions to common problems. We're an organized criminal group, former soldiers, mercenaries from the FFL, highly skilled with military experience of more than 5 years. We can perform hits all around the world. So basically, this is a for-hire hit squad who will go and kill people. Just submit bitcoins to this address, and they'll go off and kill people, right? And the most important part of this is why they believe they can operate is they say, I'm not putting words in their mouth, they say because it's anonymous. This works because it's anonymous. Anonymity allows this kind of thing to exist, allows Silk Road to exist, allows people to have for-hire murderers online to exist, right? That sounds pretty bad. So when I talk to black hats, specifically the more high-end black hats, the guys who are making between $10 and $100 million a year kind of level, they're focused primarily on changing people's buying decisions. They want to get people to buy something, right? Viagra or casinos or whatever, right? The bad thing that they're trying to get someone to do, right? Privacy is very critical to their business. If they don't have privacy, it's going to be awfully hard for them to operate in regions where they'll go to jail for that type of activity, right? And there's some regions where the jail is actually the least bad thing that can happen to them. So privacy is a very big deal. So they have something to hide. They're the people. When people say, oh, I don't have something to hide, these are the people who have something to hide. This fits the category. I think we can all agree these groups of people are the people we're after or whatever, right? And then at one point, just as a brief anecdote, they told me they were seriously considering getting a guy elected to Senate so that they could enact more privacy laws, right? So when you see somebody up in Senate saying, I want more privacy, it may be an actor working on behalf of a criminal organization who wants more privacy, right? So I think we can all agree this is a bad group of people, right? Or don't have our best interest at heart as the consumers. And then we have the governments, and not just our government, all governments. I think people are way too focused on just the NSA. It's all governments, or at least all governments that care about cybersecurity. DoubleClick, Yahoo, etc., cookies are being used and leveraged to correlate people down to a specific location. So whether you want to think about them as an adversary or not, they definitely are an adversary, depending on which side of the border you're on, depending on what you're doing or whatever. In this context, It sounds an awful lot like what I'm saying is we should actually consider privacy a bad thing, right? We should, because these governments, maybe my government isn't so bad, but these black hats are really bad, right? Maybe we should find a way to find these guys, strip away even more privacy and security so that we can get them, right? So this leaves us with some pretty ugly options. I don't want to paint a pretty picture here because it's not. It's pretty awful. So you have to kind of decide which side you're going to be on, and here are your decisions. So you should probably start looking now and pay attention because this you're going to have to make these decisions eventually. You might as well do it today. Consumer privacy versus corporate security. If you had to pick one of the two, which side would you land on? Depends on who you're paid by, depends on your ethics, but you're going to have to pick one, so you better pick the battle lines, right? Direct consumer privacy versus indirect consumer safety. So this would be like the TSA, for instance. Are they allowed to do the hand gropey stuff at the gate? In the off chance that I might get blown up in a building, sometime down the road when a terrorist hijacks an airplane or whatever, right? So indirect safety. Which would you prefer having, right? You might choose one or the other. You might be flip-flopping on some of these. It's okay, but you should know where you land. Corporate livelihood or consumer privacy. In some cases, not all cases, there are some cases where those things are in alignment, but in a lot of cases, they're not in alignment. So corporate livelihood, would you prefer a company exist or would you prefer that you have privacy, right? Would you prefer that all of your information, that all the stuff you hold secret and all the people that you know and all the secrets that they have, would you prefer that those things are now public or would you prefer that that company is in existence, is allowed to exist, right? You have to choose one of those. That might come down to that kind of decision. So to get more personal, is it your own job or your own freedoms? Do you want to be the guy employed at the company stealing people's privacy, or do you want to have your own privacy and your freedoms, right? So I never said these decisions were simple, but I think that it's important that you guys decide for yourself where you land. In a minute, Jim. So in summary, you got to decide for yourself. I'm not going to make these decisions for you. I'm not even trying to give you ethical guidance here. I'm just saying that there is a decision, and if you haven't made one, you absolutely need to make one. Is it going to be in this example, not in all cases, but in this example, is it the consumer or the advertiser? That's what I was talking about earlier. Ultimately, we need to be wary of people's motives. We need to identify what their real motive, what's actually driving them to make these statements. Are they being paid? Is it just a good ethical agreement, or do they really have a reason they believe this? You sort of have to delve into it, which unfortunately, this is a very scary one. Because we kind of need to dig in a little bit. We need to actually find information about these people. We need to decloak people before we can even understand what their real motives are. We have to strip away their privacy just to even have a conversation where we know what their motives are. So this is not an easy one. But ultimately, we need to be wary of any time we see them not in alignment with the consumer. If they're not in alignment with the consumer, there's probably a profit motive there. Probably. Not always, but probably. But I was talking with Jeremiah about this, and he said basically we need to create a new lexicon. We have all these words that are super technical, DNS rebinding and cross-site scripting and whatever that are very DOM-based cross-site scripting, very specific, very articulate, describing these things. But we don't have a good set of lexicons for privacy and security. Ironically, given the business we're in. When we go to the press and we're saying this is good for privacy, at best we're being inaccurate. At worst, we're being disingenuous. We need to come up with better words. We need to be more articulate for other people, not for ourselves. We probably know exactly what's going on, probably, barring any issues with our own understanding of technology. We probably understand all the ramifications of both sides, but as an industry, we're not very good about articulating those things. In press articles, you'll often see this is bad for privacy, but is it good for security? And so you sort of have to say, here are the pros and cons of what we're doing and let people make educated decisions. Right now, we just don't do that, or at least not very often. And then ultimately, you have to weigh what you're giving up to give up that privacy. I mean, what are you giving up? You're giving up your privacy, you're giving up your security. What are you giving up? And what are you gaining for that? Are you gaining a cool widget? Are you gaining the ability to buy t-shirts better? What are you gaining for those loss of privacies and freedoms? I'm not saying that that's bad. I'm just saying you need to make that decision. Ultimately, in this example, the statement, you are the product is something you have to internalize. Do you want to be the product? Is that okay? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, depending on what we're talking about. Or you may never be okay with it. But those are the decisions we have to make. And I think if we're a little bit more articulate about what these things are, we can make a much more informed decision, and we can allow consumers to make a more informed decision. And that's it. That's all I had to say.